The first time someone called Elena Rossi useless, she was holding a shattered teacup, and a 92-year-old man was crying. The teacup was Italian porcelain, hand-painted with lemons, and it had belonged to Don Emilio Vitale's late wife. Elena had spent 3 weeks learning which objects calmed him, which songs unlocked his eyes, which photographs made him smile instead of scream. She knew that the lemon teacup meant safety. She knew that the scent of bergamot meant morning. She knew that the old man's mind was not gone, only locked behind a door no one else had the patience to find. But when Marco Vitale, the eldest son, stormed into the memory care wing of the Vitale estate that afternoon, all he saw was a fat girl in scrubs, standing over broken porcelain, while his father wept. Marco was 52 years old, sharp-suited, and cruel in the way that inherited power always made men cruel. He looked at Elena the way someone looks at a stain on expensive carpet. His eyes traveled from her full hips to her soft stomach to her round face, and his lip curled. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if his father was hurt. He simply said, loud enough for the 2 other aides and the security guard to hear, that perhaps they should hire someone more competent, someone who did not break things, someone who could actually control the old man. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that perhaps someone less heavy on their feet would not startle the residents. Elena did not cry. She had learned, at 29 years old, that crying in front of men like Marco Vitale was like bleeding in front of sharks. It only made them hungrier. She knelt instead, carefully gathering the porcelain shards while Don Emilio's sobs quieted into the hollow silence she recognized as withdrawal. The old man was retreating again, disappearing into the fog that had swallowed his mind 5 years ago after the stroke. Elena knew the fog. She knew its textures, its triggers, its rare clearings. She knew that Don Emilio Vitale, former head of the most powerful Mafia family in Chicago, remembered more than anyone believed. And she knew, with a cold certainty that settled in her chest like a stone, that Marco Vitale was terrified of what his father might one day say. The memory care wing was a separate building on the Vitale compound, a sprawling estate in Lake Forest that looked more like a private resort than a family home. There were gardens, fountains, a pool house, a guest villa, and a main mansion that could have housed a small hotel. Elena had worked here for 18 months, ever since the previous aide quit after Don Emilio threw a lamp at her head. The job listing had specified experience with aggressive dementia patients, patience with wealthy families, and discretion. Elena had all 3. What she did not have was the thin, elegant body that the Vitale family seemed to expect from anyone who entered their orbit. She was curvy, full-figured, soft in the way that made strangers think she was weak. Her hips were wide, her stomach rounded, her arms strong from years of lifting patience. She wore her dark hair in a practical braid, and her scrubs were always clean, always professional, always modest. She did not try to hide her body, but she did not flaunt it either. She simply existed in it, and that seemed to offend people like Marco Vitale more than anything else. The other aides, Sophia and Grace, helped her clean up the porcelain. Sophia was a wiry woman in her 50s who had worked in memory care for 20 years and had no patience for family drama. Grace was younger, newer, and still frightened of the Vitale men. Neither of them said anything about Marco's comment, but Elena felt their sympathy like a warm hand on her back. She did not need words. She had stopped needing words from other people a long time ago. What she needed was to understand why Don Emilio had thrown the teacup. He had been calm all morning. He had eaten his breakfast without fuss. He had listened to the old Italian songs she played on her phone, the ones from the 1950s that made his foot tap and his eyes focus on something far away and beautiful. He had been present, or as present as he ever was, and then suddenly, He had grabbed the teacup from the tray and hurled it against the wall with a strength that should not have existed in his frail body. And then he had cried. Not the confused crying of a dementia patient who did not know where he was. This was grief. This was rage. This was a man who remembered something so painful that his only language was destruction. Elena finished cleaning and washed her hands in the small staff bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was round, her cheeks flushed from exertion, her brown eyes tired but steady. She did not look like a woman who could bring down a mafia empire. She looked like exactly what she was, a memory care aide who was very good at her job and very invisible to the people who signed her paychecks. But invisibility, Elena had learned, was its own kind of power. No one watched the invisible woman. No one guarded their secrets around her. No one realized that she was listening, cataloging, connecting fragments that no one else bothered to notice. She dried her hands and walked back into the common room. Don Emilio was sitting in his usual chair by the window, staring at the garden. His hands were trembling. His eyes were wet. Elena sat down beside him, not too close, not too far. She did not speak. She waited. After a long moment, the old man turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were pale blue, clouded with age and confusion, but there was something sharp beneath the fog today, something desperate. He opened his mouth. His voice was a rasp, a whisper, a ghost of the commanding tone he must have once possessed. He said a single word: betrayal. Elena's heart stopped. She did not react. She did not gasp or lean forward, or demand more. She simply nodded, slowly, and said in her calmest voice that she understood. The old man stared at her for another heartbeat, and then the fog rolled back in, and his eyes went empty again. But Elena had heard it, and she knew, with the same cold certainty she had felt when Marco insulted her, that Don Emilio Vitale was trying to tell her something, that someone in this family wanted to stay buried forever. The next morning, Elena arrived at the estate at 7 o'clock as usual. The spring air was cool and smelled of cut grass and lake water. She parked her old Honda in the staff lot, far from the gleaming black SUVs that the Vitale family drove, and walked the long path to the memory care wing. The main mansion loomed to her left, all stone and glass and old money. She had been inside it exactly twice, once for her interview and once for a family meeting, where she was asked to explain why Don Emilio had wandered into the garden at 3 in the morning. Both times, she had felt like a servant who had accidentally walked into the dining room during a formal dinner. The Vitale family did not see people like her. They saw functions. They saw tools. They saw bodies that performed tasks and then disappeared. Marco Vitale was the worst of them, but he was not the only one. His wife, Isabella, was a thin, elegant woman who spoke to Elena in the clipped tone of someone addressing a slow child. His daughter, Francesca, was 24 and already married to a man who worked in the family business, whatever that business actually was. Francesca had once asked Elena, in front of a room full of people, if the scrubs she wore were specially ordered, because regular sizes probably did not fit. Elena had smiled and said yes, they were specially ordered, and then she had excused herself to check on Don Emilio. She had cried later, in her car, but no one saw that. No one ever saw. The only Vitale who treated her with anything resembling kindness was the youngest son, Luca. But Luca did not live on the estate anymore. He had been exiled, or had exiled himself, 5 years ago, after some family conflict that no one discussed openly. Elena had heard whispers from the other staff. Something about a deal gone wrong. Something about a betrayal. Something about Luca being disowned and sent away to live a quiet life outside the Mafia world. She had never met him, but she had seen his photograph in Don Emilio's room. The old man kept it on his nightstand, a faded picture of a young man with dark hair and a gentle smile, standing on a boat with a fishing rod in his hand. Sometimes, when Don Emilio was lucid enough to speak, he would point at the photograph and say a name. Luca. Always Luca. Never Marco. Elena had noticed this. She noticed everything. That morning, she found Don Emilio already awake and agitated. Sophia was trying to calm him, but he was pushing her hands away and muttering in rapid Italian, a dialect so old and regional that even Sophia, who spoke fluent Italian, could not follow it. Elena approached slowly. She had learned that sudden movements made him worse. She sat down in the chair beside his bed and did not touch him. She simply waited. After a moment, she began to hum. It was an old song, a lullaby from the 1940s, that she had found on a scratchy recording in the estate's library. She had played it for Don Emilio once, months ago, and he had stopped screaming mid-sentence and stared at her as if she had just pulled him out of deep water. She hummed it now, softly, and watched his agitation begin to fade. His hands stopped pushing. His muttering slowed. His eyes found her face and held it. Elena, he said. Her name. He knew her name. He had not said her name in weeks. Most days he did not seem to know she existed. But today, he said her name like it mattered. Elena smiled and said, "Good morning, Don Emilio." She asked if he was hungry. He shook his head. He pointed at the photograph on the nightstand. "Luca," he said. Then he pointed at Elena. "You," he said. Then he made a gesture, a strange twisting motion with his fingers, that Elena did not understand. She asked him what it meant. He did it again, more urgently, and then his face crumpled, and he began to cry. Elena held his hand and told him it was all right, that she was here, that he was safe. But inside, her mind was racing. The gesture, the word betrayal, the photograph of Luca, the broken teacup. Something was connecting in Don Emilio's fractured mind, something that wanted to be known. And Elena was the only person patient enough to listen. The family lunch was scheduled for that Sunday. It was a monthly tradition, Elena had learned. A command performance where all the Vitales gathered in the main mansion's dining room to eat expensive food and pretend they were a normal family. The staff called it the Hunger Games behind closed doors. Elena was never invited, of course. She was staff. But she was sometimes asked to bring Don Emilio to the main house for these lunches, because Marco wanted to show the family that he was taking care of his father, that he was a devoted son, that the old man was still part of the family, even if his mind was gone. It was performance. It was theater. And Elena was the stagehand who wheeled the old man in and out. This Sunday, however, something was different. Marco's assistant called Elena on Friday afternoon and told her, in a tone that suggested she should be grateful, that she was expected to attend the lunch. Not just bring Don Emilio. Attend. Sit at the table. Be present. Elena asked why. The assistant said that the family wanted to discuss Don Emilio's care plan, and since Elena was his primary aide, her input was required. Elena did not believe this for a single second. The Vitale family had never wanted her input. They wanted her to shut up and do her job. Something else was happening, something she could not see yet. She spent Saturday preparing. Not her clothes, although she did choose her nicest dress, a dark blue wrap dress that fit her curves properly and made her feel less like a servant. She prepared her knowledge. She reviewed her notes from the past 18 months. She replayed every fragment of conversation she had overheard, every strange comment from Don Emilio, every flicker of fear in Marco's eyes when his father seemed too lucid. She thought about the word betrayal. She thought about the photograph of Luca. She thought about the gesture Don Emilio had made with his fingers, the twisting motion that meant something she could not yet decode. And then, late Saturday night, she remembered something. Months ago, Don Emilio had been watching an old black-and-white movie on the television in the common room. It was a crime film, something about gangsters and loyalty and revenge. In one scene, a character had made a specific gesture with his fingers, a twisting motion, while saying a word in Italian. Elena had not understood the word at the time. She had made a note of it in her phone, intending to look it up later, and then she had forgotten. She found the note now, buried in her files. The word was traditore, traitor. The gesture meant traitor. Don Emilio had been trying to tell her that someone was a traitor, and he had pointed at Luca's photograph. But that did not make sense. Luca was the one who had been exiled. Luca was the one who had been accused of something. Why would Don Emilio call him a traitor, unless the accusation itself was the betrayal? Elena sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone, and felt the pieces begin to shift. What if Luca had not betrayed the family? What if Luca had been framed? What if the real traitor was someone else? Someone still inside the family? Someone who had benefited from Luca's exile? What if Marco, the eldest son, the one who now controlled everything, had orchestrated the whole thing? The thought was enormous and terrifying. Elena was a memory care aide. She was nobody. She had no power, no connections, no evidence. She had only the fragmented words of a man whose mind was crumbling. But she also had something else. She had patience. She had observation. She had 18 months of watching and listening and understanding how Don Emilio's memory worked. She knew that certain songs triggered specific memories. She knew that certain objects unlocked doors in his mind that seemed permanently closed. She knew that the lemon teacup meant his wife. She knew that the scent of bergamot meant mourning. She knew that the photograph of Luca meant love and loss, and something unspeakable. And she knew, with a certainty that made her hands shake, that if she could find the right cues, the right triggers, the right objects, she could help Don Emilio remember enough to tell the truth. Sunday arrived gray and cold, the kind of spring day that felt more like winter. Elena drove to the estate with her heart pounding and her mind clear. She had 3 objects in her bag. The first was the photograph of Luca from Don Emilio's nightstand. The second was a small leather notebook that she had found in Don Emilio's old study, a room that had been locked for years until she had asked the housekeeper for access. The notebook was filled with handwriting she did not recognize, but the dates corresponded to the period just before Luca's exile. The third object was a gold signet ring that Don Emilio had worn for decades, a ring that Marco had removed from his father's finger 2 years ago, claiming it was a safety hazard. Elena had found the ring in a drawer in the memory care wing, forgotten and tarnished. She had cleaned it. She had kept it. She had known, somehow, that it would matter. She walked into the memory care wing and found Don Emilio dressed in a suit that hung loosely on his frail body. Sophia had gotten him ready. His eyes were distant, unfocused, the fog thick and impenetrable. He did not seem to recognize Elena when she entered. He did not say her name. He stared at the wall and muttered something about rain. Elena helped him into his wheelchair and began the long walk to the main mansion. The path was lined with bare trees and dormant flower beds. The sky was heavy with clouds. The air smelled like coming storms. Elena walked slowly, pushing the wheelchair, and spoke to Don Emilio in a low, steady voice. She told him about the lunch. She told him that his family would be there. She told him that she was going to help him remember something important. She did not know if he understood. She did not know if he heard her at all. But she kept talking, because talking was what she did, because patience was the only weapon she had ever possessed. The dining room in the main mansion was obscenely large. A mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs, upholstered in cream silk. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Paintings of dead Vitales stared down from the walls. The table was set with china and silver and fresh flowers that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. When Elena wheeled Don Emilio into the room, the family was already seated. Marco was at the head of the table, of course. Isabella sat to his right, elegant and cold. Francesca and her husband were further down, looking bored. There were aunts and uncles and cousins, a dozen people in total, all of them thin and wealthy, and radiating the particular arrogance of people who had never been told no. Marco looked up when Elena entered. His expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance, or might have been fear. He gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, the one closest to the door, the one reserved for people who did not matter. Elena parked Don Emilio's wheelchair beside the chair and sat down. The old man stared at the tablecloth. His hands were trembling. The lunch began. Servants brought out courses of food that Elena could not identify and did not want. The family talked about business, about properties, about people Elena did not know. They ignored her completely, which was exactly what she had expected. She ate small bites and watched Don Emilio. He was not eating. He was not responding to anyone. He was retreating deeper into the fog, his eyes glassy and empty. Marco noticed. He always noticed when his father made him look bad. He said, in a loud voice, that perhaps the aide should do her job and help the old man eat. The word aide was pronounced like an insult. Elena did not react. She leaned toward Don Emilio and spoke softly, asking if he was hungry. He did not respond. She tried a different approach. She reached into her bag and pulled out the gold signet ring. She placed it on the table in front of him, not dramatically, just quietly, just a small object on a white tablecloth. The effect was immediate. Don Emilio's eyes snapped into focus. His trembling hands reached for the ring. He picked it up and turned it over and over, staring at the engraved crest on its face. The Vitale crest. A lion and a sword. Marco stopped talking. The whole table stopped talking. Everyone was staring at the old man and the ring. Marco's face went pale. He asked where she got that. His voice was sharp, dangerous, the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. Elena did not answer him. She was watching Don Emilio. The old man was holding the ring like it was a lifeline. His lips were moving. He was saying something, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Elena leaned closer. She heard the word, Luca. She reached into her bag again and pulled out the photograph. She placed it beside the ring. Don Emilio looked at the photograph, and his face crumpled. He began to cry, but it was not the confused crying of a dementia patient. It was grief. It was recognition. It was a man who remembered his son. Marco stood up. He told Elena to stop whatever she was doing. He said she was upsetting his father. He said she was fired. He said security would escort her out. But Elena did not stop. She reached into her bag one more time and pulled out the leather notebook. She placed it on the table beside the ring and the photograph. 3 objects: a ring, a photograph, a notebook. Don Emilio stared at them. His crying stopped. His breathing slowed. His eyes, those pale blue eyes that had been clouded for so long, became suddenly, terrifyingly clear. He looked up. He looked at Marco, and he spoke. His voice was weak, rasping, but the words were unmistakable. He said that Marco had framed Luca. He said that Marco had forged the documents. He said that Marco had betrayed the family, betrayed his own brother, betrayed everything the Vitale name stood for. The dining room went silent, not the silence of polite discomfort, the silence of a bomb going off. Marco's face was white. Isabella was staring at her husband with an expression that Elena could not read. Francesca had her hand over her mouth. The aunts and uncles and cousins were frozen, their forks halfway to their mouths, their eyes wide. Marco tried to recover. He laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. He said that the old man was confused, that his mind was gone, that everyone knew he said crazy things. He told Elena to take him back to the memory care wing immediately, but Don Emilio was not finished. He pointed at the notebook. He said that the evidence was there. He said that Marco had written everything down, the forged signatures, the fake accounts, the deal with the rival family that had been blamed on Luca. He said that he had found the notebook before his stroke, that he had hidden it, that he had been trying to tell someone for 5 years, but no one had listened. Elena's heart was pounding. She had not known what was in the notebook. She had only known that it was important. She had only known that Don Emilio had hidden it for a reason. Marco lunged for the notebook, but Elena was faster. She grabbed it and held it against her chest. She was shaking, terrified, but she did not let go. Marco told her to give it to him. His voice was low and dangerous now, the voice of a man who had done terrible things and would do them again. Elena did not move. She said that the notebook belonged to Don Emilio. She said that the truth belonged to the family. She said that Luca deserved to be heard. And then the door opened. Everyone turned. A man was standing in the doorway, a man Elena had never seen in person, but recognized immediately from the photograph. Luca Vitale. He was older than his picture, mid-40s now, with dark hair graying at the temples, and a face that had seen hard years. He was dressed simply, a sweater and jeans, not the expensive suits his brother wore. He looked tired. He looked sad. He looked like a man who had been summoned by something he did not fully understand. Marco stared at his brother. He asked what he was doing here. His voice was shaking now, the controls slipping. Luca did not answer. He walked into the room, past the frozen family members, past the untouched food and the crystal glasses, and he stopped beside Elena. He looked at her. He said that someone had called him. Someone had told him to come. Someone had said that his father needed him. Elena realized, with a shock that made her dizzy, that she had not called him. She did not even have his number. But someone had. Someone had known. She looked at Don Emilio. The old man was smiling. It was a small smile, a fragile smile, but it was real. He had called his son. Somehow, in the fog of his fractured mind, he had found a phone and called his son. Marco was shouting now. He was saying that Luca was disowned, that he had no right to be here, that security would remove him. But no one moved. The security guards at the door were looking at each other, uncertain. The family members were whispering. Isabella was staring at her husband with something that looked like horror. Luca walked to his father. He knelt beside the wheelchair and took the old man's hands. He said he was here. He said he was sorry he had stayed away so long. He said he had thought his father believed the lies. Don Emilio shook his head. He pointed at the notebook in Elena's hands. He said that the truth was there. He said that Luca was innocent. He said that Marco was the traitor. The room erupted. Marco grabbed the notebook from Elena's hands, but it was too late. One of the uncles, a heavy-set man with a face like granite, stood up and demanded to see it. Another cousin pulled out a phone and started recording. Isabella was crying. Francesca was shouting at her father, asking if it was true. The careful, controlled world of the Vitale family was shattering like the lemon teacup, and Elena stood in the center of it, invisible no longer. Marco tried to run. He pushed past his wife, past his daughter, toward the door, but the security guards blocked him. They were not his guards, Elena realized. They were family guards, loyal to the Vitale name, not to Marco personally. And the Vitale name, the real Vitale name, had just been spoken by the old Don himself. The uncle with the granite face took the notebook from Marco's hands. He opened it. He read. His expression darkened. He looked at Marco and said that there would be a family meeting. He said that Marco would explain everything. He said that Luca would be restored. Marco's face was a mask of rage and terror. He looked at Elena. He said that this was her fault. He said that she was a nobody, a fat nurse, a servant who should have kept her mouth shut. He said that she had ruined everything. Elena did not flinch. She had been called worse. She had been called worse by men like Marco her entire life. She looked at him and said that she had not ruined anything. She said that she had only helped an old man remember the truth. She said that the truth was not ruin. The truth was justice. Luca stood up. He walked to Elena and stood beside her, a solid, protective presence. He told Marco to leave. He said that the family would deal with him later. He said that if Marco ever spoke to Elena again, if he ever threatened her, if he ever came near her, Luca would make him regret it. Marco left. The family dispersed slowly, in shock, in whispers, in tears. Isabella took Francesca and left without looking at anyone. The uncles and cousins filed out, taking the notebook with them. The servants began clearing the untouched food, and Elena was left standing in the dining room with Luca and Don Emilio. The old man was tired now, the clarity fading, the fog returning. But before it swallowed him completely, he looked at Elena. He said her name. He said thank you. Then he closed his eyes and slept. Luca turned to Elena. He asked her name. She told him. He said that his father had spoken about her, in the brief phone call, in the fragments of lucidity. He said that his father had called her the patient one, the one who listened, the one who remembered. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent her whole life being invisible, being underestimated, being told she was too soft, too heavy, too slow, too much, and not enough. And now, an old Mafia boss had called her the patient one, and his exiled son was looking at her like she was something precious. Luca asked her to stay. He said that the family would need help understanding what had happened. He said that his father would need her more than ever. He said that he would need her too, because he had been gone for 5 years, and he did not know how to come back. Elena looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the grief, the hope. She saw a man who had been betrayed by his own brother and exiled from his own family, and who had come back anyway because his father had called. She said yes. She said she would stay. She said she would help. And as the storm finally broke outside, rain lashing against the windows of the Vitale mansion, Elena Rossi realized that she was no longer invisible. She was no longer the fat nurse, the soft aide, the servant who did not matter. She was the woman who had unlocked a Mafia don's memory. She was the woman who had exposed a betrayal. She was the woman who had restored a son to his father. And she was standing beside a man who looked at her like she was the most dangerous person in the room. The days that followed were chaos. The Vitale family fractured and reformed around the truth. Marco was stripped of his power, his accounts frozen, his access revoked. The family council, a group of elders Elena had never even known existed, reviewed the notebook and confirmed Don Emilio's accusation. Marco had forged documents 5 years ago, framing Luca for a deal with a rival family that had gone wrong. The deal had been Marco's. The betrayal had been Marco's. Luca had been innocent the entire time. The news rippled through the Chicago underworld. Alliances shifted. Rivals who had sided with Marco scrambled to realign themselves with the restored youngest son. Luca, who had spent 5 years living quietly in a small town in Wisconsin, running a fishing charter business, and staying as far from the Mafia world as possible, was suddenly the heir apparent to a criminal empire he had never wanted. Elena stayed in the memory care wing. She continued her work with Don Emilio, who had retreated deeper into the fog after his moment of clarity. He did not speak again for weeks. He did not recognize anyone. But sometimes, when Elena played the old Italian songs, he would tap his foot. Sometimes, when she placed the gold ring in his hand, he would smile. Sometimes, when she said Luca's name, his eyes would flicker with something that might have been peace. Luca visited every day. He came to the memory care wing in the mornings, before the family meetings and the legal consultations, and the endless negotiations with people who wanted things from him. He sat with his father. He held his hand. He talked to him about fishing, about the lake, about the quiet life he had built, and he talked to Elena. At first, the conversations were practical. He asked about his father's care. He asked about the routines, the medications, the triggers. He wanted to understand how Elena had done what she had done, how she had reached his father when no one else could. Elena explained about memory cues. She explained about emotional recall. She explained that dementia did not erase a person, it only locked them away, and the right key could sometimes open the door. She explained that the key was not force, it was patience, it was tenderness. It was paying attention to the small things that everyone else ignored. Luca listened. He really listened, in a way that no one in the Vitale family had ever listened to her before. He asked questions. He took notes. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen, in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of family negotiations, Luca found Elena in the garden. She was sitting on a bench near the fountain, watching the sunset. The spring air was warm now, finally, and the flowers were beginning to bloom. He sat down beside her. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said that he owed her everything. Elena shook her head. She said that she had only done her job. Luca said that her job did not include exposing a Mafia conspiracy. He said that she had risked everything. Her job, her safety, her reputation, to help a man who could not help himself. He said that he had never met anyone like her. Elena looked at him. In the fading light, his face was tired but kind. He did not look like a Mafia heir. He looked like a man who had spent 5 years in exile, mourning a family that had rejected him, and who had been given a second chance he did not know how to accept. She asked him if he wanted to take over the family business. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he did not want it. He had never wanted it. He had left that world behind a long time ago. But the family needed someone. The family needed stability. And Marco had left a mess that would take years to clean up. He said that he would do what needed to be done. He said that he would try to be the man his father had believed he could be. Elena asked what kind of man that was. Luca looked at her. He said that he would do what needed to be done. He said that he would do what needed to be done. He said that his father had believed he was loyal. He said that his father had believed he was good. He said that he had spent 5 years trying to prove his father right, even when he thought his father had abandoned him. Elena felt her heart ache. She knew what it was like to be underestimated. She knew what it was like to be judged by a standard that had nothing to do with who you really were. She knew what it was like to be invisible. She reached out and took his hand. It was a bold move, bolder than anything she had ever done. She was a Curvy memory care aide, and he was the heir to a Mafia empire. The distance between them was enormous, but his hand was warm and solid, and he did not pull away. He looked at their joined hands. He looked at her face. He said her name, Elena, just her name. But the way he said it made her feel like she was the only person in the world. The weeks turned into months. Spring became summer. The Vitale estate transformed from a place of cold formality into something warmer, something almost like a home. Luca took control of the family business with a quiet competence that surprised everyone, including himself. He was not ruthless like Marco. He was not flashy, like some of the other Mafia heirs Elena had glimpsed. He was steady. He was fair. He was the kind of leader who listened before he spoke, and who remembered the names of the people who worked for him. The family elders were skeptical at first. They had expected another Marco, another aggressive, power-hungry Vitale. But Luca was different. He had spent 5 years outside the Mafia world, and those years had changed him. He had learned humility. He had learned patience. He had learned that power was not about domination. It was about protection. Elena continued her work with Don Emilio. The old man's condition did not improve, but it did not worsen either. He had good days and bad days. On good days, he recognized Luca. On good days, he would pat his son's hand and say his name and smile. On good days, he would look at Elena and say, "Patient one," and she would feel her heart swell with something that felt dangerously like love, because she was falling in love with Luca Vitale. She knew it was foolish. She knew it was impossible. She was a curvy, working-class woman from a nothing family, and he was the head of a criminal empire. But he kept finding her. He kept sitting beside her in the garden. He kept asking her opinion about things that had nothing to do with memory care. He kept looking at her like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. One night, in late July, he found her in the memory care wing after everyone else had gone to bed. Don Emilio was asleep. The night staff was on duty. Elena was sitting in the common room, reading a book about memory therapy, when Luca walked in. He was wearing a suit, which meant he had come from a meeting. His tie was loosened. His hair was slightly disheveled. He looked exhausted. He sat down across from her and said that he had just come from a negotiation with a rival family. He said that it had gone well. He said that he had used something she had taught him. Elena asked what. He said that he had listened. He said that he had paid attention to the small things. He said that he had been patient. He said that the rival boss had been expecting aggression, had been expecting Marco's style of intimidation and force. But Luca had given him something else. He had given him respect. He had given him attention. He had given him the same thing Elena gave Don Emilio every single day. And it had worked. The deal was signed. The territory was secured. No violence. No threats. Just patience. Elena smiled. She said she was proud of him. Luca looked at her for a long moment. Then he said that he could not do this without her. He said that she had changed everything. He said that she had saved his father, saved him, saved the family. He said that he did not know how to thank her. Elena told him that he did not need to thank her. She said that she was just doing her job. Luca shook his head. He said that it was not just a job. He said that she had given him something he had lost 5 years ago. He said that she had given him hope. He leaned forward. He took her hand. He said her name again, the way he always did, like it was a prayer. He said that he knew this was complicated. He said that he knew his world was dangerous and messy, and not the kind of life she had probably imagined for herself. He said that he would understand if she wanted to leave, if she wanted to go back to her quiet apartment and her normal life, and forget about the Vitale family entirely. But he said that he did not want her to leave. He said that he wanted her to stay. He said that he wanted her. Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She had spent her whole life being told she was too much, too heavy, too soft, too emotional, too invisible. And here was this man, this dangerous, powerful, gentle man, telling her that he wanted her, not despite who she was, because of who she was. She said yes. She said she would stay. She said she wanted him too. Luca kissed her then, softly, gently, like she was something precious. And Elena kissed him back. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The public reveal had already happened. The family lunch, the 3 objects, the old Don's accusation, Marco's downfall. But the private reveal, the emotional reveal, happened in the weeks and months that followed. It happened in the way Luca looked at Elena across the dinner table. It happened in the way he introduced her to the family elders, not as the aide, but as his partner. It happened in the way he defended her, when anyone at all, dared to suggest that she did not belong. One afternoon, a cousin from the extended family made a comment about Elena's weight. It was a careless comment, the kind of casual cruelty that thin people often directed at curvy women without even thinking. The cousin said something about how surprising it was that Luca had chosen someone so substantial. Luca heard it. The room went cold. Luca walked over to the cousin, slowly, calmly, the way he did everything. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten violence. He simply said that Elena Rossi was the reason his father was still alive. He said that Elena Rossi was the reason the truth about Marco had been exposed. He said that Elena Rossi was the most intelligent, most patient, most courageous person he had ever met. He said that her body was beautiful, but her mind was extraordinary, and anyone who could not see that was not welcome in his home. The cousin apologized. The cousin left, and Elena stood in the corner of the room, her heart pounding, her eyes wet, feeling more seen than she had ever felt in her entire life. The eldest son lost control completely. Marco Vitale, once the heir apparent, was now a pariah. The family council had not turned him over to the authorities, because the Vitale family did not involve the authorities, but they had stripped him of everything: his money, his power, his name. He was exiled, just as Luca had been exiled, but with none of the dignity or hope of return. He was sent away to a small town in another state, given a modest allowance, and told never to contact the family again. Elena heard about it from Luca. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt only a quiet, tired relief. Marco had been cruel to her. He had humiliated her. He had called her fat and useless and invisible. But his cruelty had been a symptom of something deeper, something rotten, and now that rot had been cut out. The youngest son was restored. Luca Vitale took his place at the head of the family, not because he wanted power, but because the family needed him. He ran the business with a steady hand and a quiet voice. He made alliances instead of enemies. He built bridges instead of burning them. He became the kind of boss that people respected, not feared. And through it all, Elena was beside him. She continued her work with Don Emilio. She continued her research into memory therapy. She became known in the family not as the fat nurse, but as the woman who had saved the Don, the woman who had unlocked the truth, the woman who had restored the rightful heir. The current Mafia boss, Luca, realized that Elena's patience had saved the truth. He told her this often. He told her in the mornings, when they had coffee together before the day began. He told her in the evenings, when they sat in the garden and watched the sunset. He told her in the quiet moments, when the world was still and the danger felt far away. He said that he had spent 5 years believing he was forgotten. He said that he had spent 5 years believing his father had abandoned him. He said that Elena had given him back his father. He said that Elena had given him back his life. Elena did not know how to respond to this. She had never been good at accepting praise. She had spent too many years being invisible, being dismissed, being told she was not enough. But Luca was patient. He kept telling her. He kept showing her. He kept proving, day after day, that she was valuable, that she was loved, that she was seen. One evening, in late September, Don Emilio had a good day, a truly good day. He woke up clear-eyed and lucid. He recognized Luca immediately. He recognized Elena. He asked for coffee. He asked for the newspaper. He asked about the family business with a sharpness that had not been present in years. Luca and Elena sat with him for hours. They talked about the past. They talked about the future. Don Emilio told stories about his youth, about his wife, about the early days of the Vitale Empire. He laughed. He cried. He held his son's hand and said, that he was proud of him. And then, as the sun began to set, he looked at Elena. He said that she was the patient one. He said that she had saved him. He said that she had saved his son. He said that she was family now. Elena cried. She could not help it. She had spent 18 months caring for this man, this difficult, fragile, powerful man, and she had never expected to hear those words. She had never expected to be seen. She had never expected to belong. But she did belong. She belonged in this strange, dangerous, beautiful family. She belonged beside Luca. She belonged in the memory care wing, with the old songs and the lemon teacup and the photograph of a young man on a boat. She belonged. The final payoff came quietly, without drama or fanfare. It came in the way the staff looked at her now, with respect instead of pity. It came in the way the family elders consulted her about Don Emilio's care. It came in the way Luca held her hand in public, unashamed, proud. It came in the way Don Emilio, on his good days, called her daughter. Elena Rossi had been called too soft. She had been called too heavy. She had been called invisible. But she had never been weak. She had never been worthless. She had never been anything less than exactly what the Vitale family needed. And now, standing in the garden of the estate, with Luca's arm around her shoulders, and the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance, she knew that she had found her place. She had found her purpose. She had found her love. The old Mafia boss remembered her name. The youngest son was restored. The eldest son was gone. And the curvy memory care aide, the woman everyone had underestimated, had saved them all. Not with force, not with violence, with patience, with tenderness, with the quiet, unshakable power of paying attention. The end.